Hey guys, so today you and I are going to talk about tools and integrating them. So let's get into it. So the question in question was, hi Frederik, how will you decide when a new development tool is genuinely useful enough to be integrated into your setup rather than just being a passing trend? That is an excellent question. What I usually use to measure whether or not something is a passing trend or if it's something that is worth having a look at has to do with one single thought. And that thought may be completely flawed, but it is the one that I've been using for years, and so far it's been working pretty well, I have to say. And that thought is, if this thing that we are hyped about, this tool, whatever, so forth and so forth, only has subjective value, in other words, it's not in any way going to change like how many bugs we have or how fast we ship or anything like that, and for whatever reason it's not a practice that you see across communities, then I am skeptical. I'll give you a good example: the clean architecture. Now the clean architecture, depending on who you ask, I would argue that most people who are outside of the .NET C# community has maybe not even heard about it. That is to me a passing trend. Unit tests are not. The reason being because it does actually exist in every community. Everybody has seen the value to a certain degree. I mean, every community is a different guys, of course. I mean, there are some things that for some reason is not as adopted as I would like to see it. I remember, if I don't quote me on this, because I vaguely remember that BDD, or behavioral driven development, originated with the Ruby community. Again, not sure, but it has spread to other communities, so it is a thing in other communities, not as big as it probably should be, but to me it's not really a passing trend. This idea is the thing that drives whether or not I adopt something into my tool suite or not. So usually what I say is that as long as I know that the problem that is being solved here has major impact, so as I was saying with testing, for example, that has major impact. Having a library that, for example, like Immutable.js, pointless, if you ask me. A completely pointless library, and the reason being, I argue that, I'm not saying that you shouldn't be using it, but to me, I have so far never experienced a situation where immutability has had any relevance whatsoever in the work that I do. Not saying that it's not like that it's a trend or anything like that. I'm simply stating that it's not something I'm going to add to my team or my stack or anything like that. It's a similar sort of mindset that you will have to have when you have to do something that I think is more important than get interested in, is this a trend, is it not a trend? And that is to ask the developers that you are working with, are they going to be able to adopt this new trend, or if it's a permanent, it doesn't matter if it's a trend, it could be a permanent tool as well. Guys, I've been in situations where I have made a conscious decision to not use something like, for example, BDD in a team, because I know that this team is not ready for that sort of testing. They are still struggling with just basic unit tests and so forth, and like they don't have the maturity to own that. It's the same thing when you have more advanced setups where, a good one is Kubernetes. I wouldn't say that Kubernetes is a trend or anything like that, so my little rule here doesn't really hold up for it, but at the same time it can't just be about whether or not it's a good tool. It really solves a really good problem, because what usually happens when you add microservices or Kubernetes to your stack is that you raise the requirements of knowledge on all the people in the team, or you have to bring in some ops person who's going to own the Kubernetes cluster or something like that. And I've seen that quite often, guys. So in some cases, as I was saying, it's not just about it being a trend. It is about the team who's going to, like in the system that you're going to build, whether or not it makes sense to add it, or if they are even ready for it. Sometimes it is worth, taking a bit of a risk and adding something to your stack, even though people may not be able to adopt it or sort of teach them. But there's also situations where even tried and true, like really established tools that can follow, whatever best practices we like to preach at the moment, are not a great idea to put into the team, because the team is simply not ready to handle it. But in general, as I said, my rule is always the same. Unless it has something that it brings to the table that is really, really, really going to make a difference between bugs are caused or development goes from, like some number to some even better number, like it's improving something like really significant, then I'm skeptical. And I'm extra skeptical if it's like a trend or something that really only exists in one community. I usually am trying to follow like that principle. If I know that this thing is solving a really serious problem that is going to make a big difference, and I know that most communities agree, like they have the same sort of issues and they try to adopt them and so forth, then I feel more secure in adding it. And I even in those sort of situations, I always preach, start small. Doesn't matter if it's a trend or nothing, or like, it doesn't matter. Always start smart, even if it's the most important tool in the world. Don't just go all in and like add everything. The best situation for you to be in, I argue, is a situation where you can always undo any risk that you're going to take. Sometimes you can't, of course, but you should always try. You should always try to make like controlled experiments and things like that before you go all in on something. And don't forget, as I was saying, even if this tool might be the next big thing or so forth and so forth, you may find that you, who's the guy or girl who's pushing it and knows about it, and you're really excited about it. Like imagine being a functional programmer, right? It doesn't matter that you are a master of functional programming, because if you force your team to use functional programming, odds are that you're actually going to see people misuse your tool. And a misuse tool, even if it's the greatest tool or like pattern or whatever, it doesn't matter because they don't know how to use it effectively. So there's always that balancing act between, all right, this big tool or this trend or this whatever I'm talking about, right, has all these benefits. But the people who are going to use it, are they all going to be able to use it maturely? Are they like what's the cost of investment and the return on investment, so to speak? And are there any risks with adding that tool to your stack? That's something you have to think about if you want to make sure that when you add a tool, it actually does bring any benefits and not just becomes some legacy thing that you have to carry around forever afterwards. So what I want you to take away from this is basically that the way that I decide if a tool is genuinely useful or not has to do with, does it solve a problem that I know I really need to have solved? There are very few tools for me that does that in terms of like libraries and stuff like that, guys. Like, as I've said before, guys, the amount of like truly disruptive tooling that has entered IT in the last 10-15 years that I have been at the very least in IT, I'm gonna miss some stuff now, but like for example Docker, SPAs, using cloud hosting, things of that nature. Like we're talking like these are very now of course AI coming along and so forth and so forth. These are very, very big changes in our community, and they are worth investigating and going into and so forth and so forth. However, as I was saying, usually at the smaller libraries or specific frameworks or things like that, it's usually less the case that this is really important. It's a do or die type of situation, and that's why I'm always very careful when I'm dealing with people who are basically pitching that, oh, we should use Angular because it is doing this and this instead of using Vue, which is the one we're using right now. Like we're talking about, it's like talking about flavors of ice cream. I am not in any way saying that they are not different or anything like that. I'm just saying that the value, the difference between having, say, jQuery on the front end and not having like an SPA or so forth, these are monstrous differences. But when it comes to library, framework to framework, it's debatable whether or not it's worth your time. Second thing that you should also always remember is that just because something is a really great idea and that some people are using it, if it's not something that is widespread and more communities are adopting, like unit test or something like that, it's also debatable. Why is it that one community swears by this pattern or this way of doing something and others do not? Sometimes they're right, sometimes they're not, but you have to consider it. And then finally, remember that regardless of how great the tool is in the hands of people who know how to use it, or other people who might be working somewhere else or doing the tech talks, that does not matter if you put it in hands of people that you work with and they don't know how to do it, they're not interested in learning it, etc., etc. Because even though the tool is great, the people behind the tool and the users of the tool may not know how to do it properly and not be interested in using it properly, and then that is a risk in of itself. Have a great day.